welcome to Dear Katie, the podcast that amplifies courageous voices and real stories of resilience, healing, and hope after trauma. Inspired by the many letters Katie has received over the last 20 years, each week she interviews survivors, healers, and experts to honor their stories and explore the many paths to healing and hope. Before we begin, please know, many episodes of Dear Katie cover sensitive topics related to sexual violence, trauma, and recovery. Listen with care and take the space you need to take care of yourself. Your well-being is what matters most. Now, let's join Katie and today's guest for a conversation that matters.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner. As you know, I am a survivor and also quite a bit of activism ever since I was 18 years old on this particular topic. I hope as your host along all these episodes, my goodness, I can't believe we've done over 250 now. This is like blowing my mind. It's like not quite synchronizing with the anniversary of our country, but close. And I am thrilled to say, like, if you have been with us and just joined recently, I say go back, and there's some really great ones. You know, there's Throwing Bad Axe in the Woods. There's like all my crazy titles. And if you have been listening, you should, all the titles are, something that catches my interest as I'm listening to each guest. So they're kind of an homage to something that stood out to me. So that's where they come from, if you wondered. And Dear Katie, I haven't really talked about this much, but then Dear Katie came from Dear Katie. And then people would write snail mail letters to me after the Time magazine cover came out when I was 18, and Time didn't ask me, but they gave out my campus mailing address at college. And so it filled up quite a bit with letters, hundreds of them. And I got enough stamps and wrote back, and usually it's because at the end of the letter it would say, P.S., please write back. And I did. So if any of you are still listening, please know that I am so grateful that you took the pen to paper back then, literally, and wrote me your own story or strength or words of courage. So it has carried me all these many years, and here we are in the online virtual podcast place. So that's a little nostalgia for all of you. And today I'm so pleased to welcome Maria Bryan. I'm going to share a little bit, but as we always do, we're going to learn more about where Maria is from. So Maria Bryan is a trauma-informed storytelling trainer. How interesting. She's the host of When Bearing Witness podcast and facilitates the When Bearing Witness Trauma-Informed Storytelling Certification Program. So I think we're going to learn a lot, for those of you who are survivors, about morphing that experience into something that might resonate with audiences, perhaps on a stage. Her work helps nonprofit leaders tell powerful and impactful stories that resist harm. So a great way to finely tune that communication skill, it sounds like, and be able to share what could be very heavily laden with trauma into something that can really empower and impact. So welcome, Maria. Thanks for being on the show.
Katie, this is such an honor to be here. Thanks for sharing this space with me today.
Yes. So I always want to know, like, where were you born? I think you're in Florida currently. Is that where you grew up too?
Yeah. No, absolutely not. So
Okay.
I was born in Syracuse, but shortly after was really raised in Queens, New York.
Okay.
So I was 80s and 90s in New York City, grew up there. I was in either Queens, Brooklyn, or Manhattan really until my 30s when I had my first child. My husband and I were in this little one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, and there wasn't quite enough room for the three of us. So we knew once she started walking, it was time to go. So my husband's from Tallahassee, Florida. So we picked up and we moved to Florida. Actually, a little bit of context missing there. I was working at a nonprofit at the time and decided that I wanted to spend more time with Mia, my daughter. And so I started my consultancy. And that's when we really decided on 1.5 salaries, it was time to move to Tallahassee, Florida. So moved to the suburbs of Tallahassee without a driver's license. I was like completely kind of felt like a fish out of water, but been here for 7 years now, and it feels like home.
Cool. So we missed a little bit of like high school and college? Can you just like go back to?
Many folks that grow up in New York City, they actually their adventure is to go out of New York. So I was in central Pennsylvania for college, and I studied print journalism to age myself at that moment, like to get something
like newspaper writing.
Yeah. At that point, to get something printed online didn't really feel substantial. So I studied print journalism, how to like work in a newsroom. I graduated. I mean, I went to school the same time as Mark Zuckerberg. So I graduated, and immediately my degree was like obsolete as far as print journalism. But of course, I learned how to tell good stories and how to interview folks and how to frame and tell a good story. And I kicked off my career in the Peace Corps. So I was a health educator in Ghana for 2 years and used storytelling to support health education. So dramas and artwork and all kinds of things to support people on just learning how to live their healthiest self. And then I came home and was like, how can I do this? How can I get paid to do what I do in the Peace Corps? And that's what brought me to the nonprofit space. Mm-hmm. So I transitioned from, this journalism degree to being in the public space. So I was in nonprofit communications and marketing for 8 years, if you include Peace Corps, because I do, consider that to be health communications. Spent much of my career in-house as a nonprofit communications manager, and then I started my consultancy. And so my consultancy was helping folks to tell their stories.
And what year was this, Maria? So you, I want to get context.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I graduated 2008 from college. Mm-hmm. And then 10 years later, I started my consultancy in 2018.
Okay. And you were in Florida by then?
And then I started my business right when Mia was born. Okay. So I kicked it off in Brooklyn. A lot of my clients were folks that I had met through, I did get my master's degree in public administration, thought that I would be in-house forever. I'm very glad I have both degrees. Both degrees are so crucial to what I do now. It's so funny being 40 now, how full circle, how it feels like things are like, why did I do that? That didn't make sense. But it all truly makes sense. What I studied, what I did those 10 years, getting my master's degree. So it was 2019 is when I moved to Tallahassee, Florida. And that's where I but by then Mia was 1. And that's when I really was building my business. And what I was really drawn to was training folks on how to tell their story, understanding their positioning, getting to the bottom of what their mission is, what their vision is, and how to articulate that.
Yeah. Let's make sure everyone knows what stories we're talking about. So when someone, you're not just talking about survivors of sexual violence, you're also talking about stories of any nature, like
any nonprofit stories. So if you are in animal welfare, the story of what it means to have brought in a rescue. A lot of folks were in public health. So a lot of them were, kind of transformation stories for folks who may have gotten a diagnosis or just learning how to, best health practices. Really, to be honest, Katie, before I got into trauma-informed storytelling, most of the work that I did, neutral isn't really a word, but it wasn't necessarily working with highly vulnerable stories, not with stories that could put people at risk. I was working again,
let's talk about let's go a little slower because you live this stuff and our listeners don't. So I was going to say, when you said the phrase kind of like stories of trauma, that could be, I forget the word you used, like hurtful, I think, something like that. There's, to me, a survivor story, it's very hard for the survivor. It could be really hurtful emotionally to put that story in front of an audience because you don't know the reception that you might receive or the disrespect or disbelief. And then there's obviously the personal cost. And I, as probably the quintessential storyteller of all this issue, since I've been doing it thousands of times at 5,000 institutions since I was 18.
Right.
That part I totally get. And I would ask our listeners, as we're talking with you, also, we'll just maybe talk more about that facet of what you do. Because I think it's aspirational for survivors to want to share their story. Even this podcast is a platform for storytelling, right? The thing that I want to learn from you is how, when you're working with a survivor who wants to be able to do that, what kinds of things do you help them think through about not just how to tell the story, but also how to care for themselves and anticipate the response?
Sure.
So maybe we could dissect it into like, what sorts of preparations do you help survivors think about, right? Like, as they're even embarking upon the idea. Then to maybe the content, because if you think about even a movie, even if a movie takes place over one day, a life in the day of, or because it's one incident that happened over the course of 1 to 4 hours, right? Or it might be a long period of time with multiple incidents of abuse, right? So how do we create a 20-minute or hour-long narrative? So maybe we'll just take one piece at a time. So when, as they come to you, do you say, okay, here's where we need to start?
I'll get to the aha moment that transitioned me to trauma-informed storytelling. So for many years in my consultancy, I was working with a range of different nonprofits to help them tell their, what we call a nonprofit impact story. So in order to raise money, they can share data, but really what's more impactful is to tell the stories. So folks come to us because maybe they are facing food insecurity, maybe because they are unhoused, maybe because they are survivors of sexual assault. They come to us, and here is the journey with them in regards to our nonprofit. And so the client or beneficiary is a character, the nonprofit is a character. And this is how and I'm going to, Katie, tell you my unlearning. Really, this is a story of me unlearning and relearning again how to tell people's stories. So I was teaching this framework on how to tell these character stories, essentially making your nonprofit the hero, right? And making the fundraiser the hero. And in one of these trainings during the Q&A, so this is literally the chat in the Q&A, someone said to me, I work with unhoused youth, and I want to know how trauma-informed storytelling works into this. And I had no answer. I really didn't have a good definition for trauma at the time. I answered the best that I could and realized I should probably have a better understanding of trauma if I am supporting folks to tell difficult, painful stories. That was my aha moment. That's when my life and career completely changed, because I realized that while I perceived that we were telling simple stories, what I now know is that many folks come to nonprofits, come for any kind of services in the public space because of their trauma, because of their lived traumas. And so folks like me, who have a print journalism degree, who have degrees in nonprofit administration, don't have that trauma background. They don't have the tools. Well, they don't want to do harm while they're well-intended. They don't have the tools to sit down with folks and to know how to ask questions in a way that's regulating, how to pass the power to survivors on how they tell their story, how to help them feel regulated, how to bring them on the journey of their story so that it is their story, not the nonprofit story. I paused my consultancy for a year and went into deep learning on trauma and resilience, how to be a trauma-informed interviewer and storyteller, and completely changed my business to one that was general on nonprofit marketing, to one that supports marketers and fundraisers on how to tell difficult, painful stories in a way that doesn't cause further harm than the trauma that already took place. In that work, I also train survivors on how to tell their stories in a way that is safe and emotionally healthy for themselves.
Okay,
so that's my journey.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks so much, Maria. I think we should spend our time focusing in on the survivors themselves and what kinds of things you have done, because I think I'm hopeful that you're going to be able to share things that will help a survivor even thinking about their story and their healing journey through the work you're doing. So if you think of a listener who's never going to stand on a stage, but still wants to learn best ideas they can from what you do, what would 5 things be that we could talk about?
Sure, that I would talk to a survivor about in order to tell their story.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a number of things that I would want to talk to them about. And first is story readiness. So story readiness doesn't mean that they're not ready to tell their story, but they might not be ready to tell their story on a bigger platform in front of many people. Maybe they're in a place where their story readiness is with their loved ones, with their therapist, within a group that is facilitated to hold traumatic stories, right? So this is a really safe, enclosed place. From there, some folks want to tell their story on a much bigger platform like you do, and you have changed the course of history through telling your survivor story. So these stories are important not only to change legislation and for folks to feel less alone and empowered to do something about their story, but it can be part of their healing. Some folks will never share their story. Some will just keep it between themselves and their therapist and their loved ones. Some of them, as part of their healing process, want to tell their stories more widely. If you are that part of your journey, there's a few questions that you should ask yourself as well. The first one, we know when you are walking through the healing process in trauma, how crucial it is to have support people in your life. So stop and think, when you're telling a story, there's before, during, and after. So before you're telling your story, do you have folks in your life? Again, this could be a licensed therapist, a group, dear friends, a good listener, but someone who will support you as you're wading through maybe the anxiety and stress of telling your story, to the moment where you're telling your story. And we can dig into what that's like, because often when people are telling their story, they're disassociating, right? There's a lot of things that are happening on because they might be going through re-traumatization. That doesn't mean they shouldn't tell their story, but they should be aware of what might be happening internally when they are telling their story. And then after, so do they have a support person in the room? Some people don't realize kind of their rights as telling their own story. So the questions they can ask is, can they have someone there? When they're telling their story, maybe they don't want someone of a particular gender there. Maybe they want to be in the comfort of their home. Maybe they'd rather not be in their home. Like, what kind of choices and support do they have? And then afterwards, when folks, when I say disassociate, people don't like that word. I think that sometimes it's a healthy response to disassociate. And what can happen is after the story is when the emotional hangover can happen. This can happen almost immediately, or it can happen a few days later. So do you have a support person that you can go to and just say, wow, I really was stoic and I told that story bravely, but I'm kind of falling apart inside right now. So we can walk through all of that. But I also want to say, and really important, and this is a 2-part question to ask yourself once you have support people, and that is, what is your goal to tell this story? And what is the positive outcome that you hope will come from telling this story? And in my work, in my trainings, Katie, because I often work with people on the other side, I'm working with journalists, podcasters, marketers, and they're telling this story for all different reasons. And sometimes they're just saying yes to telling their story because they were asked. And they don't even really have an answer for their goals and outcomes. They're telling their story because they were asked to tell their story. So just to kind of slow down and say, I want to tell my story because I want others to feel seen, because I want to feel seen, because I want to change the law, because I want justice to be served. Take some time and reflect on what your goals are and what the outcomes that you want to take place. And when you communicate that to, let's say you're going to be on a stage or you're talking to a room of police officers or healthcare workers, letting them know beforehand, hey, these are my goals and intended outcomes for sharing my story. That's really so crucial, because a lot of what I do, Katie, is bridge building between the person who's telling their story and the person who's providing that platform for them. And the last thing, and you can ask questions to kind of dig up more things, is having a emotional safety plan. And again, this is for before, during, and after. And this is going to be different for everyone. And of course, within that are those two first questions, right? That's part of having like an emotional safety plan. It might be, do you have a comfort item? Right now I'm holding a clear quartz. This is whenever I'm being interviewed, just something that makes me feel a little bit grounded. It could be during the telling your story, finding a familiar face in the room. It could be knowing that right after your interview, you're just going to take a 3-minute break and go to the bathroom and shut your eyes before you go out there and people are kind of congratulating you or thanking you, right? So just these little moments that help you internally regulate. So that's something that I would work with a loved one or a therapist to come up with different ways that you are feeling grounded and in your body. Because when we tell stories, our bodies don't always know that we're safe and grounded. They're going to go back to that place where they didn't have control and they didn't have safety. So how are we reminding our bodies every step of the way that we are safe and we're grounded? So I'll pause there for now.
That was really helpful, Maria. I appreciate all those points. They completely make excellent sense. As somebody who does this all the time, I think the ironic part is I had none of those things. There I am, doing interviews at 18 and on debating the vice president of my college on Larry King Live. Really live television. It was with no coach. Like there was no such thing as a coach back then. But I think, so I think all of this is amazing to me that you do this work, because it certainly is a whole niche new place. And it shows the progress that we've made over the last 3 decades, that we can even have someone like you. So let me ask you some more things. And if we have a survivor who's listening and they're like, I'm not ready to articulate, like speak the words, but can I write them down? Could I write them down and have AI voice read them? What kinds of like permutations of, to me, I think there's, talk to, like some of our survivors might be like, give me some other places, because I don't have a platform. No one's given me a stage to stand on. But I want to have this experience and go through the process. So what are some ways they could do that?
For people, for survivors who are listening to your podcast, I'm sure like one day I want to be like Katie and I want to have a mic and I want to be on Larry King. As painful as those things were for you,
Crazy.
But that doesn't have to be the case for everyone. You can draw, you can paint. These things can be so powerful and are still stories. You can write poetry, write dramas. You can write a story with it being about a completely different person that's not you. And that could be helpful. If you're familiar with the story, the Center for Story and Witness, this is a whole program for survivors. And I'll give you that resource that you can share to listeners. For folks to learn how to tell their stories in so many ways. You don't have to be on a stage to tell your story and word for word. And this is actually a big part of the emotional safety plan, is knowing your triggers, knowing not just the words, but the smells, the sights, what's in the room. If you can't see the exit sign, something as simple as that. So you don't have to put yourself in that situation if you think that 3 out of the 5 or 8 out of the 10 triggers will be available. You don't have to tell your story in a quote unquote traditional way. You can use AI. There's so many creative outlets to use storytelling as a vehicle for change and for healing.
And I, as you're talking, Maria, I'm thinking about like analyzing some of the things that might be helpful for our listeners to hear too. when you were talking about the exit sign being in sight, and maybe this will resonate with some of our survivors, but my favorite thing is when the room is so packed full and I get to be on the stage by myself, because I am so safe up there. Like, ironically, listeners, I'm worse at sitting in a room surrounded by humans, because that makes me claustrophobic with, like, how am I going to get out of here? Like, there's too many people in the way. I can't run anywhere. I need to be able to run, and the stage is like huge. I'm like, okay, I got lots of running space, and there's the exit over there. So I do terribly sitting in the audience. I don't care what it is. I can barely go to a concert. So I wanted our listeners to think about that too, as a reverse concept of this comfort. The other thing and maybe you would talk to this too, Maria, is, it was rough, especially in the beginning, because I would go and speak. I loved it. I did it. I chose to do this, but I would go and speak at high schools a lot, because I was thinking, if only there had been a pre-prom assembly or something, and I had heard this message, I wouldn't have necessarily gone through this. And so but then the consequences are, you're in front of a required auditorium or gym full of 1,200 teenagers, and if they have the chance to ask you questions, they might say stuff that just makes you feel blamed and blamed and blamed. And that has happened, but and then I'll toss it to you, like preparing someone for that. But I will say, ironically, it's like a vaccine. And here's what I mean. Like, having done this thousands of times, it's weird for me, because it's not like I stop feeling the hardness of telling the story. The difference is, I am not ever unprepared for a question that is a dagger meant to lash at me. And I've gotten more and more adroit at figuring out something really smart to, like, as if I'm a stand-up comic, I can take it. And because normally those would just kill you. You could just fall apart if you got one of those dagger questions. But I had them so fast and furious for days and days and days in a row, from town to town to town to town, that I will also challenge our listeners that if you do want to do this kind of work, I do think it can be just the most triumphant experience, because you will learn that nothing can hurt you. There's no words that you will not have heard, that you will not have already digested, and know that you are in the right and able to answer. So those are two things that I don't know if you teach them, but they're two things I definitely have learned over all these times of doing this.
I have so many thoughts. And again, Katie, like, you've paved the way, because you were one of the first people to say, I'm going to talk about this difficult thing. And all of these misconceptions just were thrown at you. And they always will be, because people are people. And until they have that experience, or someone they love to have that experience, there are going to be misconceptions around what it means.
One boy in a high school, he raised his hand. He's like, do you have to be on top all the time from now on? Like that. Yeah. I was like, what?
You should catalog these questions and one other reason really to catalog them. Okay. So here's two things. So if you're new to telling your story, and this is something that I really want folks to take back from this conversation, there's just a few things.
Yeah, no, you're the pro.
Yeah, this story is yours. Like, take back the power. If you have the mic, people might make you feel ill, if they're intended to or not, because I work with folks on the other side that say things that cause deep, deep harm, but they don't know they are. It's unintentional. It doesn't matter. Harm is harm. So if you're a survivor and you are telling your story, it doesn't matter where you are, if you're getting compensated, it doesn't matter. you need to know that this is your story and what your rights are as a storyteller. And one of them is you don't have to answer any question that you don't want to. So there will be a time where you have them in your back pocket, where you can just, like you said, you feel like you're a comedian on the stage, like you know exactly what to say, you know how to turn it around, or you have the data to prove them wrong. You know, it's like what someone once told me, it's like what the uncomfortable church lady comments, which is such a kind way to say it. Until you get there, you don't have to stumble through an answer. You can simply say as firmly as you can in your body, I'm not comfortable answering that question, or I am not answering that question next. And what I would love for survivors, you know, in a safe space to say, hey, these are some of the questions. And this is why I love the idea of when folks do want to kind of get on little stages or big stages. It could be as little as just sharing on social media or the kind of big stages that you're on, to know these are the types of painful questions, uneducated, silly questions that could be really painful. And again, like the pre-story that I talk about, how you can prepare. And part of it is preparing for what happens when they ask these 5 questions. What are your responses? And then when something comes up that you were surprised at, and that's when you say, this is my story and I'm not going to answer that question. And you don't have to say why. You don't have to say I'm uncomfortable. You really don't owe answers to any questions like that. Something that I think you're also saying in there is that though those questions are such great opportunities to teach the room. So there's that one boy who says this really
Do you have to be on stop now? Yeah, you're presuming I'm having sex now.
Right.
Remember?
I mean, there's so many things about that is so.
I think you could. It depends on the audience, right? And the principle. Like, it's all, you've got to know a million things and be prepared as you can. Right. Or you take a pass, like you said.
Yes, take a pass, or when you do have the language to respond to something like that and to course correct, think of all the girls in that room that just feel seen and heard. And now they have that answer. They have that answer for when someone else asks something like that. Because
I love that part, Maria. That's a really good one.
I know how many girls in that room are survivors themselves. So not everyone needs.
I like that so much. Like, let's just say that again, because I think sometimes even we all get caught up in our own heads and think it's about me, but that's brilliant, because then if we think about, oh my gosh, if I can do this great, it's going to help 1/4 of the room, right? Or right, 1/4 women. It's going to, and plus the 1 in 4 women have significant others, partners, sisters, whatever. I think that's like critical to keep reminding yourself of the biggest possible aspects of impact. And just reflecting where each survivor is and listening to the podcast, if you're still kind of in that really I pronoun stage, like I am feeling, I am doing, I need, I can't, I like all the I's, that's to me is like you probably meet survivors, they're sitting fully in I. And then I guess this is a bigger way of thinking. As soon as I could get out of I, and maybe it was when those stages I was going on were so big, it was never an I anymore. It was always like a we, like, because I was thrust it, like Oprah had her agenda and her coaches would be like, here's what we're going to tell the story about. Right. So I think this is like a really great conversation, Maria, to keep talking about this part for survivors in this niche, we're talking about for the show. A thing that, we could talk about a million things, but I want to go back to the story readiness part, because I kind of touched upon this concept, because people will come to me too and say, like, I want to do what you do, right? But I think then they get the problem then becomes, it's kind of what I want to tie those two things together. What you said was the goal. So to me, the story readiness and the goal, and maybe you could speak to some examples. It's like, if you start to tell too much trauma, like how dark you could lose people too. And you're like, but that's my truth. I'm like, I know that's your truth, but you're not doing this. You're doing this. You're either strictly doing it for yourself to hear yourself talk, or you're deciding what of what you have to offer is going to most impact the people in front of you. And that requires being able to filter through this 1,200 things and only talking about 12 things, right? Because you can't, and I'm like, you confuse the audience. They will get like, which happened first and second, who's Sue and who's like Omar, and like, I can't even remember all these people you're mentioning. Like, it's really hard to tell a story that sits well with both the survivor and the audience. And I think gluing that together, how do you help people with that? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like 5,000, it's like what you probably had to do for written journaling. Like you have interviewed books full of stuff and you have only, 850 words to write.
Right.
So I guess that's a question for you.
Something that you said that I think is so important to underline is that, I teach trauma-informed storytelling, and this isn't just about what I consider the story owner. This is in relation to the story owner. So that's for many people who are listening, their survivor story. Mm-hmm. For the storytellers are probably a lot of the allies in the room that are the ones that organize the high school gatherings, mm-hmm. that have folks on their podcasts that help them write their book. The people that are giving them the platform and the microphone, that's the storyteller. And then there's our audiences. And we need to be trauma informed in relation to all of those people. Honestly, not just ourselves, because my work is reducing harm in telling stories. I know that stories make the world a better place. I know that they do, or I wouldn't be doing this work. But I think it's so important what you said, and it is something that I talk about when I talk to survivors, is if you're telling a story in a way where the other survivors in the room are now being triggered or re-traumatized, then you might not be reaching those goals and outcomes, and actually also might be doing harm with telling your story. Mm-hmm. I will never tell people to water down their stories. It might just be a matter of giving a content warning, like just letting folks know, like, hey, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to really get into detail about what happened. So here's an opportunity to maybe pause the podcast or step out of the room, right? And so that's where you're like, you let them have that platform, but they are letting the audience know what's happening. Really deep story training is digging a little bit deeper than that, though, Katie. And that is, if your intended outcome is just to get it out, mm-hmm. then let's find a space for you to get it out. And that's where things like poetry and drama and writing books can happen. But if you're standing in front of an audience, and again, it could be high school students, it could be, police officers, healthcare workers, whatever it is, if you're trying to change behavior, if you're trying to change law, if you're trying to change hearts and minds, you are going to tell the story a little bit differently than if you're just trying to get it out.
Can you give us let's talk about that. Like, so give an example.
So it might be more structured. Mm-hmm. The very first thing, if you're trying to create some kind of behavior change, if you're trying to educate folks on how to, maybe you're talking to healthcare workers. And so when they're going through the process of someone's been, I'm going to content warning, I'm going to use the word rape. So you can pause here if you don't feel you have capacity for that. So let's say they are coming in because they've been raped, and all the process when you go to a hospital and you have to do the rape kit and everything like that. And so educating healthcare workers, and so a survivor might want to say, I want them to know how that particular experience, what went well and what was incredibly harmful for me. And my goal is that everyone in this room does a better job the next time another survivor comes for that process of survivorhood, when they have to go to the hospital, maybe get that rape kit, or maybe it might not be sexual. It could be any kind of assault, right? So if that is the goal, one of the first things is to let them know, this is my story. And while a lot of people have similar stories to me, I think it's important because there will be survivors in the room that might say, that wasn't my experience. I might actually feel hurt and offended that they're speaking on behalf of all survivors. So that's one of the first things. This is my story. This is my truth. And there are people that might have experienced this and people that haven't, but just know this is my truth. And then in telling your story, you can structure it where you're telling your story and then bringing in the bigger picture. That's when you bring in the data. That's when you're saying not just things like 1 in 4 women have experienced some kind of sexual assault, but what are specific data in regards to that particular local, maybe hospital? How many healthcare workers have not received trauma-informed training? How do we get outside of your story to the big picture? So maybe now you're bringing in data. When you're bringing in a micro story and the big picture, these things are really important for behavior change. So again, if that's your intended outcome, then frame a story around both your personal story and the bigger data, and then have that what we call to action at the end. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to just feel bad that it's broken, that we're in a broken world? Or do you want to tell them, hey, these are 3 things that you can do next time someone comes through your doors that has been sexually assaulted? Or I encourage you to go get a trauma-informed training, or we need to, and I'm sure by now this is the case, but maybe not with you at the time, regulate that only women are doing this with women and only men are doing this with men. If someone is trans, maybe that they have a say on who is doing this kind of rape kit for them. Like maybe it can be very specific. What is your call to action? What do you want to change? And share that with your audience. And so really the key of what I'm trying to say here, Katie, is it depends on where you're telling the story. If you just need to get that out there, then find a space where you can get it out there, because I want you to have that. I want you to be able to do that. But if you want behavior change to happen, if you want laws to change, there might be a little bit more of a structure for telling your story.
Those are brilliant thoughts and great points. Maria, what about this question? What have been some of the most powerful calls to action that, produce that standing ovation and rallying champion? That you've helped? Can you think of some where your client came back and was like, "Oh my God, Maria, you're not going to believe what happened. Everyone's on your face." Like, it's like so good.
I think that if you can pair a vision of the future, like what we're working towards, any kind of inspiration where you're not having people sit in the trauma and the pain of the story, but by the end, the call to action is painting a picture for the next generation to not have to go through what they went through. So I think it's when we're creating a vision at the end, when our calls to action are painting a picture for, I want hospitals to really be a safe haven. I want this hospital to be known for being a safe haven in this community. And this is what I want you to do to make that happen. Those are the kinds of things that are going to give people goosebumps and not feel that shame and guilt. Because again, now we're being trauma informed. Their amygdala is going off too while you're telling this story. All of their trauma alarms are going off because they're thinking of all the things they did wrong. They're thinking they're sitting in the shame and guilt of that. And that's okay. But how do you, by the end of that story, take that and make your story having people feel inspiration, awe, and hope, and wanting to be part of your story, actually wanting to do something.
I like that part, Maria. I like wanting to be part of your story, or wanting to take part of your story and make it their own, right? Like that kind of like connective buy-in that, I think the things that, one of the things that keep me going forever are just those moments when someone remembers something I said 20 years later. Like one of our guests on the podcast, Maria, heard me speak when she was 16. And it didn't keep her, well, she came over and heard me speak. Her dad brought her over to the high school next door because she had been assaulted at her high school, and I was speaking. So I didn't prevent it because it had already happened. But I was super excited that the call to action that she took away from my speech was, you can tell your story and make a difference. And so she was like, I can do this. I'm not going to live in shame. So that's why I asked that question, is like, because I want our guests, our listeners to think this is really hard. It's not lights, camera, action, glamour. Like there's no
Oh,
like
just
makeup artist here.
really.
I don't even do my hair. Like really truly. It's like wet still. But I combed it. There's something. But I think it's important to think, and I think a lot of times right now we are definitely looking at storytellers as very glamorous through TikToks and the those who are catching our attention. But I want everyone to know, listening, that you don't have to have the glam cam squad thing going, and your voice in and of itself and how you say things is the power, right? So anything you want to say more about, Maria? Like I know we've been talking for a while. What have we missed that you wanted to cover?
So if you are a survivor, I want you to know that you have full choice over how you tell your story. This could just be a journal between yourself. It could be speaking on a walk, or it could be on big stages. And I just want you to know that you choose where you tell your story, how you tell your story, and the questions that you answer or don't answer. I also, Katie, if it's okay, want to talk to the allies that are listening.
Yeah, definitely.
So you asked me, you didn't ask me this, but you asked me before we interviewed, are you a survivor yourself?
Right.
I'm not. Have I experienced trauma? I have experienced a great deal of trauma. I have not experienced sexual violence. And so there are allies that are listening to this that have loved ones that have experienced this but have not experienced it themselves. And there are allies in the room that might be able to give a platform. There might be, again, journalists, podcasters, storytellers that want to give a platform. And for you, I want you to know that you play a really important role in mitigating harm. Mm-hmm. There are choices that you make before, during, and after that are going to make survivors. We can never promise safety because we don't know each other's bodies, and we don't live in each other's bodies. But there are choices that you can make to promote safety in this space, to ensure they know that they are the authority on their story. So I don't just want to empower survivors, but also allies who are storytellers. So I told you, to me, I consider a difference between the story owner and the storyteller. Mm-hmm. And you're both. You're a story owner and a storyteller. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you're just sitting and interviewing, and then you have the Oprahs and the Larry Kings that are shaping the story. So if you have a role of shaping these painful, difficult stories, you have a crucial role in making the world a better place, to reduce survivors and the number of survivors, and to make it just a safer place for survivors on their healing journey. So I just want to speak to both audiences, that you both play such a powerful role in this healing process, and that you have choices. You have lots of choices that you can make in just supporting survivors on their storytelling journey.
I love that so much, Maria, that you brought that up, and it made me think of something else that I've been troubled like forever about it. It's not that you have to, like, so there are, luckily now, most every college will have speakers come in on this topic, right? And some high schools and even some corporations and definitely some military bases, they're doing more trainings, right? So the survivor storyteller as the trainer, I worry that the people hiring or bringing or organizing, as you were talking about, they may choose someone who is either not just the local rape crisis center volunteer who's a survivor, who maybe graduated from their school, and say, that's good, like that would be perfect. But then the problem is that person might not have an agenda, not have the training, not even be on close to being able to do more than your goal. If you're bringing in a speaker, should be, what am I doing? Am I just simply having stories told, or is my goal, because this is the entire incoming class of students, to make sure they understand the definition of consent and this and that, right? Like, one of my worries is that sometimes we are relying on this local free help that might not, it's not helping us move the dial around the education and awareness, because while it's supporting a survivor telling their story, it's not the learning outcome that we need to prevent sexual violence, because there's not that much data that says just by hearing a story, you're going to make that connection to the potential rapist who's going to be like, oh, that story is so sad, but I'm not that rapist. That's not the way I behave. That man was evil. I am a good guy, right? Because they're just not connecting. And therefore, I'm worried, honestly, Maria, that we have an entire group, thousands and thousands of opportunities that we're losing out because of that choice. And while it sounds very supportive of survivors, I, for one, learned really fast because I was so determined to educate. But I chose to tell my story for that reason. I was pissed. I was like, these laws are going to change. This policy is going to be rewritten. There's not going to be force as part of the definition. It's not going to be threats, coercion. It's going to be without your effective consent. I was like, I've got a mission. I'm going to use my story, wrap it up in a big bow. And there you go. You're not even going to know I told you, but you're going to hear it. You're going to be like, what did she say? Oh, yeah, consent, right? I know that was me from the get-go, Maria, but I worry, and I hope we're going to have those who are going to, either work with you or they're learning, they're school educators listening to my podcast. I'm talking to you too. Maria and I are look at, I would ask for those of you who are in that space, or if you're a student at a school and you could help change who's brought in for orientation, make sure you're going to the Title IX and saying, are they working with somebody like Maria? So they're knowing what a goal is. Don't be afraid to be part of that solution. And I'm so grateful because you can train someone to do, or go to a crisis center and do a group training for everyone who might be working with a local college, right? And if that's where they're finding their sources for education and prevention, then, watch the Maria training show. I just think that would be really cool. But that's one of the things that's why I was so excited to talk with you on the show, so our listeners can learn how complex this issue is. It's not just simply dictating your speech into, Claude or Chat GPT. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of things.
It's complex and it's nuanced. And yeah, to your point, it might just be, and it's not simple, but it's little things. If you are that college organizer and you go to the local rape crisis center, instead of just asking, hey, do you have an alumni that can talk? Is there anyone that can talk? There's a few more questions. Do you have someone who, and curious your thoughts on this, but maybe time has elapsed, so they've had more time to process.
Yes, 100%.
Understand because how you told your story at 18 was very different than how you probably tell your story now, because you've had all these years of
deciding
wisdom
and practice. I had to, just figuring out what to say at this, and when there's 50 people, and when I'm in Alabama versus New York City versus urban, you just have to nuance every single thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure another layer.
Right. And how you talked about consent at 18 is probably different than how you talk about consent now, because so much has happened culturally and how we talk about and even understand. Mm-hmm.
And what you can get away with talking about. Right. Even the things that were great, you're like, what? You didn't fight him off? I'm like, no, because when the guy takes my wallet, I don't have to fight him off in order to say I was robbed. My wallet is gone. Therefore, I was stolen. I didn't, I said,
Right. Were
no.
you drinking? What were you wearing? All of
Yeah.
those things.
Oh, wait, you give away money all the time. What do you mean you were robbed? You couldn't possibly be robbed. Look how, like, you give away money all the time. You have tons of money. You're not even going to miss your money. Right?
Right. Right.
It's so
I know.
crazy.
You can tell us, you can frame it that way
Mm.
now. I'm sure it would be very hard to frame that months after the event.
It was hard, but I would say mine was weird. Maria, like I was just like I came out of the gate running, but
You had a
that's
fi- you had a fire in your belly.
it's not
Yeah.
normal. But I think mine in some ways was, I won't say easier. It was always hard. But I always tell my audiences, look, I was white, heterosexual. I think I'm still white, heterosexual, female, virgin, Christian, second oldest college in the country, straight A student, second chair clarinet. I was good at stuff and I wasn't drunk when it happened. So my case was like a single variable. So it was really hard to pick me apart. And luckily that's all the world could handle back then, is a single variable case. Like FBI daughter, like I had everything. I had Calvin background growing up, shotgun farmers. Like we had all the
Right.
American pie you could eat. It was good. It was where we were at the moment. But this is really exciting. I love talking with you. I didn't even know your field exists, but now maybe you created it. So
I created it, and I'm so grateful that there are other folks that are doing this work as well. At the time, there was just very little out there, and I really do encourage listeners that create platforms to train yourself in trauma-informed storytelling. And if you're a survivor, and you don't have to tell your story, but if you want to tell your story, to seek out trainings. And if you work closely with survivors, to your point, these are the trainings that I typically give are with centers like this that say we have survivors that want to tell their story, but we just want to make sure that they know their rights. They're doing this in a way that's emotionally healthy for them, and not just emotionally healthy. We didn't even talk about this, about talking about like what would it mean legally? What does it mean for your family?
Mhm.
What does it mean for your reputation? Like these are all parts of the conversation too. And so, yeah, happy to come and I do those trainings in person and virtually, mostly virtually. So to make it more accessible, but it's not just survivors that need this training. So many people in the storytelling ecosystem need training and how we can hold these stories in a way that promotes safety and resist harm. And I can't say this more firmly. These stories are foundational to make the world a better place, to change laws, to change culture, to change understanding. And so we can mitigate harm and still tell these powerful stories.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Absolutely. And, I think that's some of our greatest books of all time are full of stories, right? That we keep reading over and over. Well, thank you for being on the show so much, Maria. We have learned a ton. And thank you for also including our supporters and allies in the discussion today. I think that's really helpful. And if you are a survivor and you're like, oh, my partner, my friend needs to hear this, like, that's why we're here. You can share the podcast with other people you think can benefit. So I just close out good self-care. If you are ready to share a story or turn that journal into something more, please do. If you're ready for justice, we have the National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline, which is free. I Take Back the Night. So there are all kinds of avenues for you to start taking the next step wherever you are in the process. Until we meet again, thriving and surviving. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear Katie. These conversations are never easy, but they're always necessary, and we're so grateful you chose to share this space with us. If something in today's episode stirred something within you, please give yourself what you need. Whether that's rest, support, or just a deep breath, you're not alone. To hear more stories, resources, and survivor-centered conversations, be sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We want to hear from you, so please leave us a review and share your feedback. Your thoughts help us create episodes that resonate with listeners. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.